camera pans across a pristine dojo floor in downtown Chicago, where a middle-aged black janitor methodically pushes his mop. His weathered hands grip the handle, the same hands that once held championship titles. When the dojo's star black belt mockingly challenges him to spar for fun, no one expects the quiet man who cleans their sweat to reveal why he disappeared from the martial arts world 15 years ago. What would you do if the world forgot who you really were? Asterisk. The elite Tiger Strike Dojo stood like a fortress of glass and steel on Chicago's north side, its polished floors reflecting the city lights that never dimmed. It was 9:23 on a Tuesday evening when Marcus Thompson pushed through the service entrance, his gray maintenance uniform bearing the creases of too many washes. At 42, he moved with the careful precision of a man who had learned that invisibility was its own form of armor. The last students were filtering out, their expensive gear bags slung over shoulders that had never known real weight. Marcus waited in the shadows until the automatic doors sealed shut, then emerged with his cleaning cart, wheels squeaking a familiar rhythm against the bamboo flooring. His routine never varied. First, the training mats, each blood stain and sweat mark telling stories of ambition and amateur technique. Then the mirrors, where students admired their forms without understanding their flaws. Finally, the equipment, leather-heavy bags that swayed like ghosts when the building settled. Marcus worked in silence, earbuds playing nothing, just keeping people from attempting conversation. His hands, scarred across the knuckles in patterns that spoke of old battles, moved the mop in circular motions that mirrored footwork from another life. The trophy case always took longest. Not because it was dirty, but because Marcus couldn't help studying each belt, each medal, each photograph of victorious fighters who thought they understood combat. Their achievements were respectable, even admirable, but they were participation trophies compared to what he'd once held. In his wallet, folded so many times the creases had worn white, was a photograph that told a different story. A younger Marcus, eyes bright with victory, holding 3 championship belts, while a little girl, his daughter, wrapped her tiny arms around his neck. That man had been called Hurricane. This man was just Marcus who cleaned floors. Only one person in the dojo ever really saw him. 8-year-old Keisha Williams, who took beginner classes on Tuesdays and Thursdays, always waited by the door until her mother finished talking with other parents. "Hi, Mr. Marcus," she would say, her smile genuine in a way that had become foreign in his world. He would nod, sometimes managing a small smile in return, and she would chatter about her day while he swept around her feet. She reminded him of Jasmine. His daughter would be 23 now, probably wouldn't recognize the man her father had become. 15 years. That's how long Marcus Hurricane Thompson had been dead to the world. The man who had held 3 mixed martial arts championship belts simultaneously, who had gone 47 fights without a single loss, who had been called the future of the sport by every major publication. That man had vanished like smoke after a fire that consumed everything. The memories came in fragments when he cleaned, especially late at night when the dojo's silence pressed against his temples. The roar of 20,000 fans chanting Hurricane in Madison Square Garden. The weight of gold around his waist. The camera flashes that turned night into day. The taste of victory that had once meant everything and now meant nothing at all. The betrayal had come from the last place he'd expected. James Wheeler had been more than his manager. He'd been his brother in everything but blood. 10 years of friendship, of shared dreams, of building an empire from nothing. They'd started in a converted garage in Detroit, Marcus hitting a heavy bag held together with duct tape, while James talked about the future like a prophet. "You're going to be bigger than Ali," James would say, and Marcus had believed him because when you're young and hungry and talented, belief is all you have. Even when the money started flowing, endorsement deals, pay-per-view percentages, appearance fees that could buy houses, Marcus had trusted James with everything. Why wouldn't he? They were brothers. The first sign of trouble had been a missed mortgage payment on his training facility. A banking error, James had said, already handled. Then came questions about tax discrepancies. Paperwork confusion, nothing to worry about, focus on the next fight. Marcus had been deep in training camp for his title defense against Konstantin Volkov when the FBI showed up, $23 million. That's what James had taken, filtered through shell companies and offshore accounts with the kind of sophistication that suggested this had been the plan all along. Marcus had stood in his kitchen, still wrapped in morning sweat from road work, and listened to federal agents explain how his brother had hollowed out his life from the inside. Patricia left 2 weeks later. His wife of 12 years couldn't handle the shame, the reporters camped outside their home, the whispers at their daughter's private school. "I didn't sign up for this," she'd said, as if marriage came with fine print about scandal exemptions. She took Jasmine to her mother's house in Seattle and filed for divorce from there. The custody hearings happened while Marcus was tied up in federal court, trying to prove he hadn't known about James's scheme. By the time he was cleared of any wrongdoing, Patricia had remarried, and Jasmine called another man daddy. The false doping allegations that surfaced during the investigation planted by rivals who smelled blood in the water were just the final insult to a corpse already cold. The commission had suspended him pending investigation, a process that dragged on for 2 years. 2 years of lawyers eating what money James hadn't stolen. 2 years of watching his gym get foreclosed, his cars repossessed, his name become synonymous with scandal. When they finally cleared him, when the truth came out about the planted evidence and fabricated test results, the damage was irreversible. Promoters called with comeback fights, big money to resurrect Hurricane Thompson. Marcus had hung up on everyone. "They took everything," he'd told his last remaining friend. "I won't dance for them again." The pride that had made him champion also made him choose exile over humiliation. So Marcus Thompson legally became just Marcus Thompson. No middle name, no nickname, no past. He'd driven to Chicago in a 15-year-old Honda, found a studio apartment in a building where nobody asked questions, and answered a want ad for janitorial services. The elite Tiger Strike Dojo needed someone reliable, someone who wouldn't steal, someone who could work nights without complaint. The owner, Richard Stevens, had barely looked up from his paperwork during the interview. "Can you start tonight?" That had been 3 years ago. 3 years of invisible labor, of meditation through monotony, of finding peace in the absence of ambition. Derek D. Strike Simmons arrived at 10:15, long after regular classes ended. The dojo's star student had his own key, a privilege earned through regional championships and the kind of charisma that brought in new students. At 24, Derek was everything Marcus had once been: cocky, talented, and convinced the world owed him reverence. He trained late because he liked the empty dojo, liked the way his movements echoed without competition. Marcus had learned to work around him, keeping to the edges while Derek shadowboxed in the center ring, throwing combinations at ghosts who never hit back. "Yo, Marcus," Derek called out, not bothering to look away from the mirror where he admired his form. "You missed a spot by the water fountain. Some kid puked there earlier." There had been no vomit, no spot, just the casual cruelty of someone who needed to feel superior. Marcus moved to the fountain anyway, wiped down the already clean surface, said nothing. Derek laughed, the sound sharp in the empty space. "Man, you really just do whatever people tell you, huh? No backbone at all." The other late-night regulars began filtering in over the next half hour. Brad Chen, 19, and working toward his purple belt promotion, always had something clever to say. "Hey Marcus, you ever think about actually learning martial arts instead of just cleaning up after real fighters?" Tyler Washington, 22, with a brown belt he'd earned through politics more than skill, liked to demonstrate techniques near where Marcus worked, forcing him to dodge or move his equipment. "Oops, sorry man, didn't see you there. You're like a ghost or something." Their laughter came easy, the kind that belonged to young men who'd never lost anything that mattered. Sensei Richards arrived at 10:45, ostensibly to check on the advanced students, but really to flirt with Jennifer, the 28-year-old kickboxing instructor who sometimes stayed late. Richards carried his black belt like a crown, though anyone with real experience could see the holes in his technique. He'd learned from videos and seminars, never tested in real competition, never bled for his rank. "Thompson," he barked, because using first names implied equality. "When you're done with the floors, make sure you sanitize all the equipment, twice. We have important visitors coming tomorrow." Marcus nodded, continued mopping, let the disrespect wash over him like water. He'd learned that anger was a luxury he couldn't afford. In prison not for crimes, but visiting James during his 5-year sentence, Marcus had met an old boxer who'd told him the secret to survival. "Make yourself small, brother. Small targets are hard to hit." So he'd practiced invisibility until it became second nature, until even his presence barely disturbed the air. The young fighters mistook this for weakness, not recognizing the discipline required to contain hurricane winds. "You know what I heard?" Tyler announced to the group, loud enough to ensure Marcus would hear. "I heard janitors make like $12 an hour." 12? Man, I spend more than that on a protein shake. Brad laughed, adding, "That's why they're janitors, bro. No ambition, no skills, just pushing dirt around until they die." Derek nodded, warming up with high kicks that came dangerously close to Marcus's cart. Natural selection, baby. Some people are warriors, some people clean up after warriors. Way of the world. The mockery had become a nightly ritual, each comment designed to remind Marcus of his place in their hierarchy. He'd grown immune to most of it, the jokes about his salary, his uniform, his age. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the way Derek kept glancing at him, sizing him up like a predator who'd noticed something interesting about prey. Maybe it was the full moon visible through the skylight, pulling at old tides. Or maybe it was just time, the way earthquakes are inevitable after enough pressure builds beneath the surface. "Hey Marcus," Derek called out, and something in his tone made the other students pay attention. "You ever been in a real fight? Like thrown a punch at something besides dust bunnies?" Marcus paused in his mopping, considered his response, settled on truth because lies required energy he didn't want to spend. "A few," he said quietly, resuming his work. The admission hung in the air like a challenge nobody expected. Derek's eyes lit up with the kind of malicious joy that belonged to bullies everywhere. "A few? What, bar fights? Somebody try to steal your mop bucket?" The laughter came on cue, but Derek wasn't finished. He moved closer, shadow falling across Marcus's workspace. "Tell you what, old man, I've been working on my sparring, need a moving target. How about you step in the ring with me, just for fun? I promise I'll go easy on you." The dojo went quiet, except for the hum of fluorescent lights. Brad pulled out his phone, already anticipating content worth sharing. Tyler grinned, moving for a better view. Even Sensei Richards looked interested, pausing his conversation with Jennifer to watch. Marcus straightened slowly, hands still on the mop handle, and met Derek's eyes for the first time in 3 years of working there. What Derek saw there made his smirk falter for just a second, something deep and still and dangerous, like ocean depths where light doesn't reach. "I'm working," Marcus said, voice carrying an edge nobody had heard before. "Got floors to finish." But Derek smelled blood now, pushed harder. "Come on, janitor, don't be scared. I'll make it worth your while." He pulled out his wallet, made a show of counting bills. $50 says you can't last 30 seconds with me. Easy money for someone like you." The insult hung between them, weighted with years of similar dismissals, similar assumptions about worth and value. "Actually," Derek continued, warming to his theme, "let's make it interesting. You land one clean hit on me, just one, and I'll pay your salary for a month. What's that, like $2,000? Probably more than you've ever seen at once." He turned to the others, playing to his audience. "What do you think, guys? Should we let the janitor try to be a fighter for once?" The encouragement came in cruel waves. "Do it, Marcus. Show us those bar fight moves. This is going to be hilarious." Brad had his phone up, recording already. "Yo, this is going viral for sure." "Janitor versus champion." Jennifer looked uncomfortable, started to speak, but Richards touched her arm. "Let them have their fun," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Might teach Marcus his place." That word place hit Marcus in memories he'd buried deep. His place had once been at the top of the world. His place had been on magazine covers and cereal boxes. His place had been teaching young fighters the difference between violence and warriorship. Now his place was apparently here, being mocked by children who thought they understood fighting because they'd never faced someone who could end them. The mop handle creaked under his grip, wood protesting pressure that could snap bones. From somewhere near the entrance, a small voice cut through the noise. "Mr. Marcus isn't scared." Keisha had stayed late, her mother caught in parking lot conversation. She stood by the door in her white beginner's uniform, hands balled into tiny fists. "He's braver than all of you." Derek laughed, the sound ugly in the fluorescent brightness. "Your hero pushes a mop, little girl. Watch close and maybe you'll learn why some people matter and some people don't." Something shifted in Marcus then, tectonic plates grinding after years of stillness. Not rage he'd burned through rage long ago, used it as fuel until only ash remained. This was different, deeper, connected to the photo in his wallet and the little girl defending him, and every person who'd ever been told their place was beneath someone else's boot. He set the mop carefully against the wall, movements deliberate and measured. When he turned back to face Derek, several students stepped backward without meaning to. "All right," Marcus said, and his voice carried the rumble of distant thunder. "One round, No money needed. He walked toward the ring, each step shedding years of practiced invisibility. Derek's grin widened, mistaking acceptance for surrender. That's what I'm talking about. Someone get this man some gloves. 16-ounce, don't want to hurt him too bad. The scramble for equipment felt festive, like preparing for carnival games where the outcome was fixed and everyone knew it. Marcus accepted the gloves wordlessly, muscle memory guiding hands that had rapped thousands of times. He didn't warm up, didn't stretch, just stepped through the ropes with an economy of motion that should have been a warning. Derek bounced on his toes, throwing flashy combinations at air, playing to the phone's recording every moment. Standard rules, he announced. 3-minute round, or until the janitor quits. Which probably means about 10 seconds. More laughter, but nervous now, uncertain. They touched gloves in the center. Derek's tap dismissive, Marcus's measured. Then Derek danced backward, hands high in textbook stance, waiting for Marcus to bumble forward like an amateur. Instead, Marcus stood perfectly still, weight distributed evenly, hands low in what looked like poor defense but was actually an invitation. His breathing slowed until his chest barely moved, conserving energy like a hunter who knew patience killed more surely than speed. "Come on, old man," Derek taunted, throwing a probing jab that Marcus leaned away from without seeming to move. "Fight back, do something." Another jab, another minimal dodge, Marcus giving ground in circles that kept him perfectly balanced. To the students watching, it looked like fear. To anyone who understood fighting, it looked like something else entirely. Sensei Richards frowned, stepping closer to the ring, recognition tickling the edges of memory. Derek grew frustrated, his attacks becoming wilder. A right cross that Marcus slipped by millimeters. A front kick that found only air where a target had been. Each miss made Derek angrier, made him throw harder, made him forget the fundamentals that separated sport from survival. "Stop running," he shouted, charging forward with a combination meant to overwhelm. Marcus parried the first punch with his forearm, redirected the second with an open palm, and let the third whistle past his ear. The movements were subtle, almost invisible, but they were perfect. "Did you see that?" Brad whispered, lowering his phone slightly, the way he moved just then. Tyler shushed him, but doubt had entered the room like smoke under a door. Derek felt it too, the shift in atmosphere, the way Marcus's eyes never left his, reading him like a book written in a language Derek didn't know he was speaking. Angry now, embarrassed by his inability to land clean shots on a janitor, Derek loaded up his right hand for a knockout punch. Time slowed the way it does in moments of revelation. Derek's shoulder telegraphed the punch like a billboard advertisement. His weight shifted, his hip turned, his fist traveled in an arc designed for maximum impact and minimum efficiency. Marcus could have countered in 17 different ways. Could have stepped inside and delivered an uppercut that would have separated Derek from consciousness. Could have kicked the supporting leg and watched him crumble. Could have simply moved forward, letting Derek's own momentum carry him into a collision that would have ended everything. Instead, Marcus caught the fist mid-flight, his hand wrapping around Derek's like a father catching a child's tantrum. The impact that should have been there simply vanished, absorbed and nullified by perfect technique and timing. Derek's eyes went wide, pulling against a grip that felt like iron wrapped in flesh. Marcus held him there for a heartbeat, 2, 3, letting the reality sink in. Then he spoke, voice carrying clear across the silent dojo. "You're fighting Marcus the janitor," he said, releasing Derek's hand with a gentle push that sent him stumbling backward. "Hurricane Thompson died 15 years ago. But if you really want to meet him..." Marcus straightened to his full height, rolled his shoulders once, and suddenly the air in the dojo felt electric. "I've got a few minutes to spare." One of the older students, a man in his 30s who'd been training since the early days of mixed martial arts, pulled out his phone with shaking hands. He typed a name into Google, waited for images to load, then held the screen up for others to see. The gasp was collective, disbelieving. Side-by-side photozone of Hurricane Thompson holding 3 championship belts, another of their janitor from the dojo's security footage. The facial recognition was undeniable despite the years, despite the gray in his hair, despite the way life had carved lines around his eyes. "Holy shit," someone whispered. "That's him. That's really him. The undefeated champion. The man who beat Volkov and Santos and Mitchell all in the same year." The whispers spread like wildfire, phones appearing in every hand, searches confirming what seemed impossible. Marcus Thompson, the ghost of MMA, the hurricane that had blown itself out, had been cleaning their floors for 3 years, had been enduring their mockery, their disrespect, their casual cruelty, all while possessing skills that could have ended any of them without effort. Derek heard the whispers but couldn't process them, too focused on the man in front of him who no longer looked like prey. Marcus had shifted into a stance that belonged in textbooks, not the flashy, wide poses that look good in movies, but the compact, efficient position of someone who understood that fighting was about surviving, not performing. His hands were still low, but now Derek could see it wasn't poor defense, but supreme confidence, the kind that came from knowing exactly what distance meant and how to control it. Again, Marcus said, and it wasn't a question. Derek found himself nodding, pride overriding the voice in his head screaming warnings. He attacked again, this time with more respect, more technique. It didn't matter. Marcus moved like water around stone, each dodge minimal but perfect, each movement teaching a lesson Derek was too proud to learn. A slip here, a parry there, demonstrations of fundamentals elevated to art. He never attacked, never threw a punch or kick, just showed Derek repeatedly how many times he could have ended it. The demonstration lasted 90 seconds that felt like hours. Derek, exhausted, humiliated, threw increasingly desperate attacks at a ghost who materialized just long enough to show him his mistakes. When Derek finally dropped his hands, breathing hard, sweat pouring down his face, Marcus hadn't even elevated his heart rate. The silence in the dojo was complete, broken only by Derek's ragged breathing and the distant sound of traffic outside. 30 seconds passed about 5 minutes ago, Marcus said quietly, pulling off his gloves with practiced motions. I believe someone owes me a month's salary. The joke fell flat in the stunned atmosphere. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Derek sank to his knees on the canvas, not from physical defeat, but from the weight of understanding. He'd challenged a legend and been given mercy instead of the destruction he'd earned. Sensei Richards approached the ring, his own black belt feeling suddenly fraudulent. Mr. Thompson, he began, voice cracking slightly. I had no idea. Why didn't you ever say anything? Why work here as a... He couldn't finish, the word janitor sticking in his throat like confession. Marcus looked at him with eyes that had seen too much to judge small cruelties. Because work is work, he said simply, and honest labor has more honor than borrowed glory. The crowd parted as Marcus left the ring, students pressing against walls to give him space he'd never been afforded before. He walked to where Keisha stood, eyes bright with vindication and something deeper, the recognition that heroes didn't always wear capes or championship belts. Marcus knelt to her level, reaching into his pocket to pull out something small and worn. It was a patch, faded but still recognizable, the logo of his old gym, the one where champions had been forged before scandal burned it down. For you, he said, pressing it into her small hands. For believing when nobody else did. For seeing what others couldn't. Keisha clutched the patch like treasure, which in a way it was a piece of history, a fragment of the hurricane that had blown through the sport and changed it forever. I knew you were special, Mr. Marcus, she said, and her smile was worth more than all the championship purses he'd ever won. Derek approached slowly, checkbook in hand, but pride shattered. The money felt meaningless now, insulting in its smallness compared to what he'd witnessed. Marcus looked at the check, then at the young man who'd thought cruelty was strength. Keep it, he said, voice gentle but firm. Use it to learn the difference between a fighter and a warrior. One hurts people because they can, the other protects people because they must. The truth hung in the air like incense, sacred and transforming. Marcus walked back to his cleaning cart, picked up the mop he'd set aside, and returned to work. The floors still needed finishing, the equipment still needed sanitizing, but now every movement was watched with new eyes, every simple action revealing the discipline underneath. Students began asking questions, tentative at first, then bolder. Could you show us that parry? How did you read his attacks so easily? What was it like, fighting at that level? Marcus answered some questions with demonstrations, others with silence. He showed them footwork while mopping, explained distance management while emptying trash. But when they asked about his past, about why he'd walked away, about what happened to Hurricane Thompson, he would only say, some storms blow themselves out. What matters is what grows in the ground after. It was all the explanation they would get, all they deserved after years of blindness. By midnight, the dojo was clean, and most students had left, carrying stories that would spread through the martial arts community like wildfire. Videos were already circulating, already accumulating views and comments and disbelief. Hurricane Thompson found working as janitor, MMA Legend School's arrogant fighter, the champion who chose peace. But Marcus wouldn't see any of it, wouldn't read the comments or respond to the interview requests that would flood the dojo's phone lines by morning. He was already thinking about tomorrow night's shift, about the floors that would need cleaning and the equipment that would need maintaining. The work would be the same, even if the watchers would be different. There would be respect now where there had been dismissal, awe where there had been mockery. But Marcus had learned that both were just different forms of blindness, different ways of not seeing the person beneath the perception. As he prepared to leave, Keisha's mother approached. She'd watched everything from the doorway, tears streaming down her face as she recognized something in Marcus that went beyond fighting the dignity of someone who'd lost everything and chosen to build something new from the ashes. "Thank you," she said simply, for showing her that strength isn't always loud. Marcus nodded, understanding passing between them wordlessly. The last person in the dojo was Derek, sitting on a bench with his head in his hands. Marcus paused at the door, considered leaving without words, then walked back. The young fighter looked up, expecting mockery or lectures, finding neither. "You have talent," Marcus said quietly, "but talent without humility is just violence, looking for a victim. Tonight you were the victim. Learn from it." Derek nodded, throat too tight for words. Marcus continued, "I've been where you are. Young, gifted, convinced the world owed me recognition. Then I learned that the world owes us nothing. We owe the world whatever good we can do with whatever gifts we have, even if that good is just keeping floors clean and showing kindness to little girls who believe in janitors." He turned to go, then added, "Especially then." The night air hit Marcus's face like benediction as he left the dojo. Chicago sprawled around him, millions of lives intersecting and diverging, each carrying their own victories and defeats. He walked to the bus stop where he'd waited hundreds of times, but tonight felt different. Not because anything external had changed, but because he'd remembered something essential, that choosing peace wasn't the same as accepting defeat. That walking away from a fight you could win was sometimes the greatest victory of all. His phone, ancient by modern standards, buzzed with a text. The number was unfamiliar, but the message made his breath catch. "Dad, I saw the video. Mom told me everything. Can we talk? Jasmine." Marcus stared at the words, feeling earthquakes in his chest where his heart used to be still. His daughter, after 15 years of silence, reaching across the gulf that scandal and pride had carved between them. He typed slowly, carefully, each word weighted with years of things unsaid. "I'm here whenever you're ready. Love, Dad." The bus arrived, pneumatic doors hissing open to reveal the familiar interior where he'd sat countless times in anonymous silence. Tonight, the driver, an elderly black woman who'd never spoken to him before, smiled and said, "Saw what you did in there. My grandson takes classes at that dojo. Thank you for reminding those boys what real strength looks like." Marcus managed a smile, the expression feeling foreign but not unwelcome on his face. As the bus pulled away, he could see the dojo through the window, its lights still burning bright. Tomorrow there would be questions, interviews, offers to return to fighting. Old enemies would emerge with challenges, old friends with apologies. The hurricane of his past would try to reform, to pull him back into its eye. But Marcus had learned the secret that eluded most champions, that the hardest opponent to defeat was your own ego, and the greatest victory was choosing not to fight at all. His reflection in the bus window showed a man at peace with his choices. The championship belts were gone, sold to pay lawyers, or lost in storage lockers. The fame had evaporated like morning dew under harsh sun. The fortune had been stolen by someone he'd loved like a brother. But what remained, the knowledge, the discipline, the ability to choose mercy over vengeance, nobody could take that. It lived in his bones, in his breath, in the way he moved through the world, like water finding its level. The bus route took him past the old neighborhood where he'd once owned a mansion, now subdivided into apartments for families trying to make ends meet. Past the gym where he'd trained champions, now a chain pharmacy with fluorescent lights and sale signs. Past the billboard that had once carried his image, now advertising injury lawyers with promises of justice for the wronged. The city had moved on without Hurricane Thompson, filled his space with other dreams and disasters. And that was as it should be. Nothing stayed the same except change itself. Marcus's apartment building rose from the corner like a brick prayer, solid and unadorned. He climbed the stairs to the third floor, keys jingling with the rhythm of routine. Inside, his space was sparse but clean: a bed, a chair, a small table where he ate meals in silence. On the wall, a single photo, not of his championship days, but of him teaching a kids' class years before fame arrived. The children's faces were bright with possibility, unmarked by the disappointments that would surely come. He'd been a different man then, believed in different things. But maybe the core had always been the same. He sat on his bed, pulled out the folded photo from his wallet. His daughter's face smiled up at him from across the years, frozen in a moment when he'd been her hero for real reasons, not just for wearing gold around his waist. Tomorrow he might hear her voice for the first time since she was 8. Tomorrow everything might change, or nothing might change. The uncertainty would have once driven him to the heavy bag, made him punch until his hands bled. Now it just made him breathe deeper, accepting what would come. Through his window, Chicago's lights sparkled like earthbound constellations. Somewhere in that maze of brightness, Derek was probably replaying the night's events, learning or not learning from his humiliation. Somewhere, Keisha was showing her parents the patch, telling them about Mr. Marcus, who was secretly a champion. Somewhere, videos were spreading across screens, carrying his story to places he'd never see. And somewhere, perhaps, people were understanding that strength wasn't about what you could do to others, but what you chose not to do, even when you could. Marcus Thompson, janitor, former champion, ghost of hurricane past, lay back on his narrow bed and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he would return to the dojo, push his mop across the same floors, clean the same mirrors that reflected the same dreams. But something fundamental had shifted, not in the world's perception of him, but in his acceptance of himself. He'd spent 15 years thinking he was hiding from his past. Tonight he'd learned he'd been building his future one clean floor, one kind word, one act of dignity at a time. The city hummed its midnight song outside his window. Cars passed like prayers for destinations unknown. Wind rattled the glass like knuckles on a door, asking to be let in. And Marcus Thompson smiled in the darkness, knowing that sometimes the greatest battles were won, not with fists, but with the simple act of showing up, doing your work, and treating everyone from champions to children with the respect that made us human. The hurricane had blown itself out years ago. What remained was something quieter but no less powerful: a man at peace with his place in the world, understanding finally that every place had dignity if you brought dignity to it. In a world obsessed with power, have you ever considered the strength it takes to be gentle? Asterisk.